The road has been quiet this week. Long highways stretching through farmland, small towns appearing out of the darkness and disappearing just as quickly. At first, Iowa felt ordinary, quiet, predictable. But the longer we drove, the more something else begins to stand out. Not just the places themselves, but the feelings attached to them. A cemetery where something lingers, a dormitory where footsteps echo late at night, a road where people say that you shouldn't stop. Tonight, the midnight drive is still in Iowa, but not for long. Before we cross that state line, there's one more question worth asking. What exactly stays behind in the places that we leave? After a week of driving through Iowa after dark, a pattern begins to emerge. At first, each place felt separate. A cemetery in Iowa City, a dormitory in Indianola, a strange jail in Council Bluffs, a quiet road outside of Burlington, fields stretching out near Charles City. Different locations, different stories, each one with its own setting, its own history, its own explanation, or lack of one. And in the beginning, it's easy to treat them that way, as individual stops, separate experiences. But the more time that you spend with them, the more they begin to feel connected. Not because the stories are identical, not by any stretch, and not because they share the same origin, but because the feeling is the same. There's a certain kind of quiet, a certain kind of tension, something subtle but consistent. At the Black Angel, it was the presence of something watching. Not moving, not speaking, just there. A stillness that felt intentional, as if the space itself was aware that it was being observed. And when you stood there for long enough, you begin to feel it too. That awareness, that sense of being part of the moment. At Simpson College, it was different. Not a presence in one place, but movement. The sound of footsteps in an empty hallway. The suggestion that someone might still be walking through a space long after they're gone. What made that feeling stronger wasn't necessarily what you saw, but it's what you expected to see. You'd hear something, pause, look down the hallway, and for just a second, you'd almost expect someone to be there. But there never was. And that absence became part of the experience. At the Squirrel Cage Jail, the feeling shifted again. It was less about presence and less about movement, but more about atmosphere. A weight. A pressure that seemed built into the structure itself. Not because of anything happening in the moment, but because of everything that has happened there before. You walk through the space. You see the design. You understand how it worked. And there's something about it that lingers. Not visible, not measurable, but definitely noticeable. And then there was Stony Hollow Road. A place where nothing is documented. No confirmed event. No historical record that explains the story. It's just something that people say. Something passed from one person to another, year after year. And yet, the experience is so real. Because the moment that you drive on that road at night, the story becomes part of what you feel. The silence deepens. The darkness feels closer. The bridge becomes more than just a crossing. It becomes a point of focus. A place where something might happen, and even if nothing does, the feeling remains. Even the lights near Iron Hill, whether they're natural, misunderstood, or something else entirely. It follows the same pattern. A place, a report, an experience. And then a story that grows around it. Each of these locations exists on its own, but together they suggest something much larger. That certain places don't just exist physically, they carry something else, something harder to define, a memory, a feeling, an imprint. And once that imprint is there, it doesn't ever fully disappear. It becomes part of the space. It's something that you don't necessarily see, but it's something you can feel if you spend enough time there. And maybe that's the real connection. Not the events themselves, but the way people experience them. The way a place can change. Simply because of what you know about it. Because once a story attaches itself to a location, it becomes part of how that location is perceived. You don't just see it anymore. You interpret it. You find yourself listening differently. You notice more. And over time, those experiences build. Layer by layer. Person by person. Until the place itself begins to feel like it's holding on to something. Not any single event necessarily, not any single story, but a collection, a pattern. And after a week of driving through Iowa, that pattern becomes harder and harder to ignore. What are your thoughts on our trip through Iowa this week? Let us know in the comments below. And we would love to hear anything that we missed. Please give us a ring, leave us a message on our hotline, the Midnight Drive at 402-610-2836. In our next segment, we're going to go spend some time in the governor's mansion, Terrace Hill, on the Midnight Drive. Welcome back to the Midnight Drive. Tonight, we're wrapping up our trip through Iowa. In Des Moines, high above the surrounding streets, sits Terrace Hill, a large Victorian home overlooking the city. From a distance, it feels steady, grounded. A place that has remained while everything around it has changed. Traffic moves below. The city shifts. Buildings rise and fall, but Terrace Hill stays where it is. Elevated, separate, watching. And even before you step inside, there's a sense of distance from the outside world, from the pace of everything below. The air feels quieter up there, the space more contained, as if the house exists slightly outside the rhythm of the city. And then you step inside. The transition is immediate. The sounds of the outside world fade. The atmosphere changes. Inside, the rooms are carefully preserved. Polished wood, detailed craftsmanship, high ceilings that carry sound differently. Furniture placed with intention. There's nothing random. There's nothing out of place. Each room feels arranged, maintained, held in a particular moment. Spaces that reflect more than a century of life. And unlike some of the places that we visited, there's nothing overtly unsettling here. There's no dramatic history tied to any single event. No singular moment that defines the space. No widely told story people come to test. Instead, there's accumulation. Years layered on top of years. Moments repeated again and again. Quiet routines. Ordinary days. And like many homes that have existed for that long, the stories are subtle. Staff members who spend long hours inside the house have occasionally described small moments. Nothing dramatic, nothing frightening, just noticeable. Footsteps in another room, soft, unhurried. The kind of sound that makes you pause and listen. The sound of movement when no one else is present. A shift in the building that doesn't match any visible cause. A door that seems slightly out of place, not open, not closed, just different than it was a moment before. A chair that feels like it's been moved, only slightly, but enough that you notice, enough that you question your memory. Nothing that can be proven, nothing that can be repeated on demand, nothing that holds up under any type of scrutiny, but enough that people notice. Enough that they remember, and more importantly, enough that they don't completely dismiss it. Because the experiences aren't intense. They don't demand attention. They don't interrupt anything. They exist quietly in the background. And that's exactly what makes the atmosphere in this place different. Because it doesn't rely on any single story. It doesn't build around one particular event. It builds slowly through small experiences, through repetition, through time. Unlike places known for intense or frightening encounters, Terrace Hill feels ridiculously calm, almost peaceful. There's no sense of danger, no immediate tension, but the calm has a texture to it, a depth, because beneath it, there is something else. It's not active, it's not visible, but it is present. There's a subtle awareness, a sense that the space is still occupied in some way. Not by something moving through the halls, not by something trying to be seen, but by something that hasn't entirely left. And that idea isn't unusual, because homes, more than most places, are built around repetition, daily routines. Morning light through the same windows. Footsteps on the same floor. Doors opening and closing in the same patterns. Conversations in the same rooms. The same actions repeated over and over again, over days, years, decades. And when those moments are layered over time, they begin to build. Not physically, but experientially. The space starts to feel lived in, even when it's empty. You find yourself walking through a room and you can sense how it was used, where people gathered, where they just passed through, where they paused. And in a place like Terrace Hill, those layers run deep. Because the house hasn't just existed, it has been occupied, maintained, preserved, observed. And that continuity matters because it means the patterns were never fully broken. They were simply slowed down. And sometimes, when the building is still, those same patterns seem to echo. A sound where there shouldn't be one. A slight shift in awareness. A moment where the present feels slightly out of alignment. You're standing in a room, and for just a second, it feels like something else overlaps with it. Not visibly, not clearly, just a subtle sense that the space holds more than what you're seeing. And then it passes, gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only the question, did something happen? Or did you imagine it? Visitors sometimes describe a similar feeling, not always tied to a specific moment, more of an overall impression, a sense that the house feels occupied, even when it's quiet, even when no one else is nearby. They move through the rooms slowly, taking in the details, the craftsmanship, the arrangement, and occasionally they pause, not because something happened, but because something felt different, a shift, a subtle awareness. The kind of feeling that's difficult to explain afterwards because it wasn't an event. It was just a moment. And moments like that don't leave evidence. They leave impressions. Whether that presence is real or simply the result of human perception. It's a feeling that continues to be reported. And the consistency of that feeling is what makes it interesting because it isn't dramatic. It isn't exaggerated in any way, and it doesn't rely on fear. It's quiet, subtle, repeatable in tone, if not in detail. A house that has seen generations come and go, different families, different lives, different routines layered into the same space. And somehow, those layers don't fully disappear. They remain in small ways, in patterns and impressions, in the way the space is experienced. And that raises an interesting question. Not about whether something is there, but about how we experience places like this in general. Because when you step into a house with that much history, you don't experience it as empty. You experience it as something that has been lived in. And maybe that's where the feeling comes from. Not something supernatural, not something unexplainable, but something deeply human. The recognition of repetition, the awareness of presence, the understanding that this space has held lives before yours. And whether that presence is real or simply the mind interrupting a space filled with history, it creates the same result. A house that doesn't feel empty, a space that feels held. And that feeling stays with you, even after you leave, because once you've experienced a place like that, you begin to notice it elsewhere. You're listening to The Midnight Drive. Welcome back to The Midnight Drive. We've been spending time in Des Moines' historic Terrace Hill. And we're going to take a little trip to a different region in Des Moines. We're going to go to where Riverview Park used to be. Along the Des Moines River, there was once a place filled with noise, Riverview Park. And for decades, it was one of the most active places in the city. Lights, music, movement, crowds gathering night after night, the sounds of rides turning, metal against metal, the hum of machinery layered beneath everything else. Voices overlapping, laughter rising above the noise. Footsteps moving consistently from one attraction to the next. Energy that never fully settled. It was designed to be experienced, to be felt, and not quietly, not passively, but all at once. Bright, loud, alive. And for a long time, it was. People returned again and again, summer after summer, the same rides, the same lights. The same sounds repeating across years. For some, it was routine. For others, it was something brand new. But for everyone, it left an impression. Because places like that aren't just visited. They're remembered. And then, gradually, it was all gone. Not all at once, not overnight, but slowly. The rides were removed, one by one. The structures were dismantled. The lights turned off. The sounds faded. Until eventually, there was nothing left to generate them. The land was repurposed. Changed, reclaimed in a different way. And what remained was something very different. Today, the space is quiet. It's open. It's almost empty. Grass where the structures once stood. Paths where crowds once moved. Air where sound once filled every available space. And at first glance, there's nothing unusual about it. It's just another open area, just another piece of land along the river. But that emptiness is what makes it feel so strange. Because the mind doesn't experience it as empty. It fills in what used to be there. The movement, the sound, the presence of people. You stand in one place and imagine what it once looked like. Where the rides stood. Where the lights hung. Where people were gathered. And that contrast creates something unusual. Because you're used to experiencing two versions of the same place at once. What it is. And what it used to be. And in that overlap, something unsettling appears. It's not frightening, it's not threatening, it's just disorienting. This is what people describe as liminal space. A place caught between states. Between what it was and what it is now. Not fully one or the other. And at Riverview, that feeling can be very strong. Especially at night. During the day, there are still reference points. Light, movement, the presence of other people. But at night, those anchors disappear. The river moves quietly nearby. A constant low sound that blends into the background. The wind passes across the open ground, uninterrupted. Nothing to catch it, nothing to break it up. And then the darkness settles in. Soft at first, then deeper, until the space feels wider than it did during the day, less defined. And that's when the absence becomes noticeable. Because you expect something. Even if you don't realize it, you expect sound, movement, activity. And when it isn't there, your mind compensates. It searches. It listens more carefully. It tries to fill the gap. Some people describe hearing things. Not clearly, not consistently, just enough to notice. A faint suggestion of music. Not a melody that you can follow, just a tone, a rhythm. Something that feels out of place. Others describe what sounds like distant laughter. Soft, brief. The kind of sound that feels familiar, but doesn't belong to the present moment. And when they stop to listen, it fades. Gone before it can be understood. Gone before it can be confirmed. Leaving only the impression that something was there and then wasn't. Of course, the brain is capable of recreating sound. Memory is powerful. Expectation is powerful. When you know what a place used to be, your mind fills in the missing pieces. It reconstructs the experience. Even if you've never been there before, it's reconstructing things that you've looked up online. Maybe you've found old video clips. Maybe you've found old photographs. Your mind pieces together what it feels like the space should be filled with. A quiet space becomes layered with imagined noise. An empty field becomes crowded again. But that doesn't make the experience any less real, because what you feel in that moment is real. The pause, the uncertainty, the brief sense that something is overlapping with the presence. And that's what makes places like Riverview so interesting. Because the phenomenon isn't necessarily about something being there, it's about something being missing. And then your mind reacting to that absence. You walk through the space. And you can feel where things used to be, where people gathered, where movement was constant. Even if you've never seen it yourself, even if you only know it through stories, the space carries that suggestion, that outline, and your mind fills it all in. But every so often, something feels slightly out of sync. A sound that seems just a little too clear. A moment that lasts just a little too long. A feeling that doesn't fully resolve. And that's where the experience shifts. Because now it's not just a memory. It feels like something else entirely. Something that doesn't quite belong to you. And then, just as quickly, it's gone. The space returns to what it is. Quiet, still, empty. But the feeling lingers. Because once you've experienced that contrast, you can't fully ignore it. The next time you stand there, you notice it sooner. The absence feels more defined. The silence feels heavier. And the space feels less neutral than it did before. That's the nature of liminal spaces. They exist between definitions, between past and presence, between presence and absence. What are some liminal spaces in your neighborhood? Let us know in the comments below. Feel free to reach out to us on our hotline, The Midnight Drive, 402-610-2836. There is an idea, not proven and not universally accepted, but often discussed in connection with places like these. It's known as the stone tape theory. The theory suggests that physical materials, stone, wood, metal, might be capable of recording energy. Not in the way a device records sound or video, not in a way that can be measured or played back on demand, but in a more abstract sense. That emotional or intense events leave an imprint on the environment where they occur. An impression, something subtle, something that doesn't disappear when the moment ends. And under certain conditions, those imprints can be replayed. Not consciously, not intentionally, not as a performance, but as echoes, fragments, moments repeating themselves without awareness, a sound without a source, a movement without a presence, a feeling that something is happening, even when nothing is. If that idea were true, it would offer a way to understand places like the ones that we visited here in Iowa. Not as locations where something is actively occurring, but as places where something has already happened and just hasn't fully settled. The Squirrel Cage Jail, a place defined by repetition, the same movements, the same rotations, the same routines, over and over and over and over again. It's a structure built around control, around confinement, around cycles that never changed, day after day, year after year. If repetition leaves an imprint, a place like that would absolutely hold it. Not as a memory that you can see, but as a pattern that you might be able to feel. Terrace Hill, a home layered with a daily life across generations. Not a single defining event, but thousands of small ones. Conversations, footsteps, moments that repeated quietly over time. The kind of repetition that doesn't stand out in the moment, but builds gradually, until the space itself begins to feel occupied, even when it's empty. Riverview Park, once filled with energy and sound, movement that never stopped, noise that filled every available space, is now quiet. It's wide open space. But perhaps it's not entirely empty. Because when something that active disappears, it leaves behind a contrast, an absence that feels noticeable. Almost like a space. The space itself is remembering what it used to be. Even Stony Hollow Road, a place where the story itself has been repeated so many times that the experience begins to follow. The same drive, the same bridge, the same ritual, again and again and again. Different people, same expectation. Same moment. And over time, that repetition becomes part of the place. Not because something is physically there, but because the experience has been reinforced, shared, recreated, layered into the environment. Even the lights near Iron Hill, whatever their source might be, follow a similar pattern. A sighting, a report, a return. People going back to the same place, looking for the same thing, watching the same horizon, waiting for something to appear. And sometimes it does. The theory doesn't require ghosts in the traditional sense. No conscious entities, no awareness, no intention, just imprints. Moments that have settled into a place and remain there. Not active, not alive, but not entirely gone either. And whether or not that theory is true, it reflects something real about how we experience the world because places matter. They hold meaning. They shape how we feel. They influence how we interpret what we see and hear. A quiet room can feel calm, or it can feel heavy. An empty road can feel peaceful, or it can feel unsettling. And the difference isn't always in the place itself. Sometimes it's in what we bring with us, what we know, what we've been told, what we expect. But sometimes it feels like more than that. Sometimes a place feels like it has a memory of its own, not in a literal sense, not in a way that can be proven, but in the way it affects you, the way it changes your awareness, the way it holds your attention. You step into a space, and something about it feels familiar, or heavy, or quiet in a way that doesn't feel empty. And you can't always explain why. Maybe it's architecture, maybe it's acoustics, maybe it's psychology, or maybe it's something we don't fully understand yet. Because the human experience of place is complex. It's built from perception, from memory, from interpretation, and from something harder to define, something that exists between those things. And that's where theories like this begin, not as answers, but as attempts to describe a feeling, a pattern, a shared experience that appears in different places, under different conditions, but with the same underlying tone. A sense that something remains. Tonight, the midnight drive is leaving Iowa. The highway stretches out ahead. The engine settles into a steady hum. The road straightens. And the places we've passed through begin to fall behind. The cemetery, the dormitory, the jail, the quiet roads, the open fields, one by one, they fade into the distance. Their details become less clear, their shapes blending into memory. But the feeling doesn't disappear as quickly because those places don't just exist where they are. They exist in how they were experienced, and that experience is what stays with you. The next time you pass through a quiet town after dark, you might notice it. The next time you step into an old building, you might feel it. The next time you find yourself alone on a long stretch of road with nothing but darkness around you, you might remember and wonder whether places do hold on to something, whether moments can leave traces, whether repetition can shape a space, or whether it's simply the way the human mind tries to understand the world around it. Either way, the result is the same. Because once a place has a story attached to it, it never feels entirely empty again. Tonight, the midnight drive crosses the state line. Iowa fades behind us. The road continues forward. Dark, quiet, endless. And somewhere beyond the next stretch of highway, there's another place waiting. Another story. Another moment that might leave its mark. And all it takes is someone to stop, look around, and listen.